At some point in time, we're all going to have conflict with some other person, and you need that rapport and you need that equity to solve those problems. Otherwise, it's kind of miserable. But day in and day out, relationships with the people that you work with, that 40% of your day, are really, really impactful. And they have always been the thing that make or break, my experience at every one of my jobs.
Welcome to the Backcountry Marketing Podcast. Today, I'm sitting down with Erin Keane. She is the VP of Marketing for Ikon Pass and Alterra Mountain Company. Erin, good to see you.
Thanks for having me, Cole.
Yeah, it's good to have you on the show. I'm excited for our conversation today. I think this is going to be a fun one. You mentioned in our intro call, building relationships with people will get you further than carrying a big stick. And I think that accurately describes kind of the summary of our conversation that we're going to dive into today. Erin, I'd love if you could kind of give us an opening statement. Why is the power of relationships something you think about?
So we have relationships in all kinds of places, right? We have personal relationships with people like spouses, family, friends. We have relationships at work, vendors, colleagues, coworkers, and we have relationships with brands, right? Things that we feel like we really connect with, and people or brands that align with the values. And the reality is the people that we work with, we spend almost 40% of our day with every day, every week, every year. And in a lot of places, and especially for me, those relationships have been the thing that have made my job the most fun. And I felt like I've been most successful. And a lot of the roles that I've been in have always been roles of influence, not roles of power. And so being able to tell somebody, you have to do this because I said so, or you have to do this because this is what the contract says, is not usually either very effective. It doesn't even work with my kids when I tell them that either. But it's really ineffective. And for me, I've never been in a role where I could say that either. And so I really did have to find ways to get people to do things because they wanted to, or because there was some shared goal that we both had to get there. And so for me, having really good, truly authentic relationships has been my path for as long as I can remember.
Yeah, interesting. Well, I'm excited to dig in a little further. We're going to talk about tips to build relationships, ways to maintain them, and just kind of your overall thought process around the power of relationships. Because I think there is something we all know are important, but maybe something we don't actively think about, unless if we're having like a confrontational moment with a coworker or a client or someone. Before we dig in, though, I'd love if we could back up a little bit, provide a little context on your role with Alterra and Ikon, and yeah, kind of paint the scene for us. What do you do?
Great. So I am what I'd like to consider the everything bagel. I'm a little bit of everything. I'm really more of a generalist than I am a specialist. And my experience over time and currently in my current role is much broader than it is deep. And so I like to joke that I like moonlight with other departments. I don't think they always want me to be in there, but I like to pretend I work in IT and I work with the legal team and I'm kind of a part of everybody's team. So in my role today, I've been with Alterra for almost 6 years. It has been different every day since I showed up, but most of my time is really spent on Ikon Pass and thinking about the product, the ski pass, and then how does that work with all of our partners. So one thing that's unique about Ikon Pass is that out of the 50 plus destinations that are on the Ikon Pass, only a handful of them are owned by Alterra Mountain Company. And so while there is this element, right, of I sit at the Denver office, sort of corporate, and there is this element of we can tell the resorts that we own a little bit of what to do coming from Denver. It's not effective. But all the other resorts and the destinations that we work with, we can't tell them to do anything. We have to want them to be a part of the program. We have to want them to do the things that are good for the product. And so a big part of my role is working with these partners and these destinations as a part of this program that is built on relationships. And so while I do have this element of product, why is it priced this way? What is the access? What are the benefits? That's definitely a part of my job. But really, I spend an enormous amount of my time building relationships with people in ski resorts all over the world to make this thing work. So like I said, I've been there almost 6 years. It has been different every day since I have shown up, right? When I started, I think we only had 20 some odd resorts, and there's maybe 15 of us in the marketing department. There's a few more than that today. And my role has sort of become this land of sort of everything in the middle. And I joke with people that I don't send emails and I don't put anything on the internet. I don't do social posts. I don't build creative. I don't write copy. But what I do is make sure that all of the things continue to move forward. So very sort of marketing operations focused. And then I also tend to work on a lot of projects that nobody knows what to do with. And people will say, it doesn't fit in a box. It doesn't fit in the email box. It doesn't fit on the digital teams box. It doesn't fit on media buying box. And so, but it touches all of these different things, and it kind of touches IT, and it kind of touches legal. Okay, Erin, we'll give it to Erin. Erin will work on this project. And so I tend to get a lot of sort of random things, which I think is great because it keeps things interesting. And I love, again, this idea of being a generalist, broader experience and less depth.
Hence the everything bagel.
The everything bagel. That's like the best description I can come up with is I am a little bit of everything.
How much of your job is spent interacting with HQ and all of the resorts? Like, is that 50% of your time? Are you the main liaison between them?
So I would say that it's probably sort of 50-50, right? So and it changes throughout the year, right? We have a really great team of people who put the website together, who put social content together, who builds emails, build really great media plans, build a really great brand. And all of those things have to work together to get to, the launch every year that, we put out. But we also need all of these other people at the resorts to also make this thing work. So I do probably spend 50% of my time sort of in the marketing world, really focused on go-to-market planning. And then the other 50% of my time is all of these other things with resorts and other departments.
Interesting. Got it. So your time is split amongst many different disciplines and random tasks.
Yes. Sometimes like my brain feels like I'm having 15 different conversations with 15 different people with 15 different expertise on a daily basis.
Interesting. When did you first realize that relationships are a key kind of cornerstone to obviously your job now, but maybe walk us back in time. Like, when did you realize relationships were important?
This is a great question. I actually really like this one because I have two good stories for you. The sort of bookend when I realized how important they were, and then when I saw how great they can be for you when you have them in place. So before my current job, a few stops ago, I worked at Vail Resorts, and I worked in the sponsorship partnership group. So think about partnerships with Cadillac, Audi, Anheuser-Busch, Pepsi, Coke, etc. And so I worked at the corporate office in Broomfield, and that really was a position of influence. I couldn't tell the resorts to do anything, and walking around with a contract to say, hey, you have to do this is really ineffective. But I was new in the job, and we had to get some partner placements set up to fulfill on the contract. And we hadn't had much luck. And so I decided I'm going to drive up there. We're going to figure this out. And so I had reached out to the head of ops. It was great. I'm going to meet with you. And we were sitting out at the bottom of the resort. And I jumped right in and I started telling him, like, we need to put this thing here and we're going to do this. And he very quickly interrupted me. And he made it very clear he had no interest in helping me. I had never asked for his help. I had never asked for his input. I didn't come at it from a team approach, and I had no equity in a relationship. My problem was my problem, and he was not interested in helping me. And I was really, really caught off guard, to be honest. And I learned two really important things, right? And he was right. I didn't ask for his input, and this wasn't a team effort. And while I did show up there and say, hey, let's figure this out, I really didn't have any equity in the relationship, and I didn't approach it to, how can we work together to solve this problem? I just sort of said, you need to solve this problem for me. Yeah. And he became one of my favorite people to work with. And after that conversation, we really did start to build a lot of equity in that relationship. But I really realized it wasn't a team effort, and there was no shared goal, and there was no incentive for him to help me, right? Yeah. There was no reason for him. And just telling somebody you have to do this because I said so is really, really ineffective. On the flip side, same job, several years later, I was at a work event, and it was right in the middle of the Birds of Prey World Cup event at Audi. So there was a lot, or at Beaver Creek, there was a lot going on. And I was out at this work event with one of my clients, and the head of North America for this company, he said, tomorrow morning at 7 a.m., I want to show up at the bottom of the gondola, and I want to get on, and I want to film my own private video that I'm going to use internally back at the office when we go home. And it was 11 o'clock at night. And I thought, how am I going to get the gondola turned on? How am I going to get a video crew up there? World Cup is going on. There are a few other things to do. And I kind of sat there like a deer in headlights. My coworker, Tom, at the time, this is one of my favorite stories. My coworker, Tom, was standing there, and he said, you know what? I overheard what they were asking for. I know the head of Lyft that's working tomorrow morning. If you get them there and you have the tickets, the waivers, the ski equipment, everything is ready, you get them there by 7 a.m., I'll have the gondola ready for you. And I thought, I have no idea how he's going to do this. I'm fascinated to see how he's going to pull this off. So I ran around all morning with a video crew of people trying to deal with all of these details. And I showed up at 7 a.m. and there he was, gondola turned on, ready to go to get these people on. And there was no incentive for Tom to help me. But he knew that it was really important for me, and he knew it was really important for the client, which was ultimately really important for our department. And I look back at that at a time of like, he jumped in and he volunteered to help, and he got up, at the crack of dawn to get out there and do something that wasn't for him at all. And I think that really speaks to our willingness to be in the foxhole together and to solve problems together when there's really not anything in it for the other person, right? It's not this quid pro quo type relationship. It's just this authentic value that you put in the relationships and the people that you work with. So those were 2 times. And that was really at Vail when I started to realize when you have it and it's there, it's so powerful, and you can get so much done, and you can solve a lot of problems, and it's a lot more fun. Like, let's be honest, being in the foxhole sometimes sucks when you're having to deal with really difficult things, and every day is a grind, and you feel like you're just pushing your rock uphill every single day. But if you feel like you have people in that foxhole with you, then it's not so bad, and you will come out on the other side, and you'll look back and you'll say, what amazing things did we accomplish together? And when you don't have them, it's lonely, right? It's not a lot of fun when you feel like you're just constantly pushing that rock uphill by yourself all the time. And we all know that we have times that are in our jobs, right, where it's not every day is super fun. And some days and some stretches of time, they're a lot harder. But I think when you have those relationships at work, and we all have relationships with mentors, right? People outside of our job that we can go to for advice, and we can rely on to give us feedback and coaching and things like that. But day in and day out, relationships with the people that you work with, that 40% of your day, are really, really impactful. And they have always been the thing that have make or break, my experience at every one of my jobs.
Yeah, fascinating. How much of your day do you spend thinking about like the art of relationships and like the behind the scenes process of like creating and crafting relationships? Or have you just learned all this stuff and you're just off to the races and you don't give it much thought?
Building relationships is absolutely an art. And I think one of the challenges of that is everybody is different, and what everybody needs is different. So my relationship with you, based on your personality and your role and what you're doing, is going to be very different than somebody in another department, right? Finance and legal and accounting, they often need different things than maybe, our person in social media needs out of a relationship. And so it's definitely an art. I learned very quickly on to try to recognize that, try to see other people for who they are and try to flex to who they are, and don't expect people just to match your style. And I would say I probably spend 50% of my time thinking strategically about what are the opportunities to continue and build the relationship. So like actually putting thought in it versus just like, it'll just happen. There's an element of just organic relationships, right? And when we try to force relationships, they rarely work out, right? And they take time. One of my favorite things, your podcast with Jordan Williams, he talked about patience. And that really spoke to me too, is that relationships take time, and authentic relationships are based on true trust. And trust takes time and effort and patience to build. You can't get it overnight. You can't buy it. You can't bribe your way to it. You really have to commit to the time and the effort and consistency of building trust with people. And so I do think you have to make an effort to build relationships, because sometimes that means that you're having to do things for somebody else, right? That match their style or match their needs of what they want. And so if you only think about just my style and how I want to do it, and I'll just go about my day and assume that organically it'll happen, I think you'll miss opportunities. And that said, I also think the people that we have relationships with too, that kind of build organically on their own, are also really are probably the easier ones, right? Because they just sort of happen on their own. But there are a lot of people that I work with in my job that there is no reason. Our styles are totally different. Our jobs are totally different. But if I don't make an effort to make sure that there's rapport there and there's some equity built, then it's probably going to be difficult in the future, because we're going to have a challenging conversation at some point in time, right? We all have conflict. At some point in time, we're all going to have conflict with some other person, and you need that rapport and you need that equity to solve those problems. Otherwise, it's kind of miserable, right? And I think about people who I have conflict with. When I have conflict and I have a good relationship with them, I don't see it as an argument. It's really just I pick up the phone and call them and say, what can we do? How are we going to solve this together? I see where you're coming from, but see where I'm coming from, and we come up with a solution. When you're approaching conflict as an argument, your relationship is probably a good indication of, or the argument itself is probably a good reminder of where your relationship is, right? It's a good litmus test of how much of a relationship do you have when you have sort of what feels like an argument.
So you mentioned earlier, like you moonlight in a bunch of different departments, and I'm imagining you like walking into the legal department or the IT department, or like showing up at a resort and like helping troubleshoot, gates not working. I'm imagining like you putting on different hats every time you show up in these different locations, which I respect a lot, because like you're I don't know if you're changing yourself, but you're presenting you're relating with someone in a different way than maybe you would with someone else. Does that feel like an internal conflict if you're like not being yourself when you are interacting with? Are you being yourself, or are you being someone else for these other people?
Great question. And I think it's not changing who I am. It's changing my approach. It's changing my communication. It's changing how I ask questions, how I present information, but it's not changing who I am, because who I am is I am here to solve problems and to get across the finish line together. I don't believe that the ends justify the means. I think how we get there together and how the work is done means something. I believe in teamwork. I don't believe in just, the pursuit of individual goals. And so, years ago, I did a, like the Myers-Briggs study. And we did, at the time it was called Insights. And we got these colors, and the group that I was in, you had to get up and you had to read your color, and you had to read all the things that come with why I'm a red or a blue or green. And there was a gal that I worked with at the time, and we had been having a lot of conflict, and I couldn't really put my finger on it of like, why do we seem to be butting heads all the time? And we were sitting in this group kind of going over our colors, and one of the things that was brought up was, you don't care about my opinion, you never ask me. And my response was, we're in a staff meeting. If you have an opinion, just raise your hand and give it. But it was a reminder that I think it's obvious that you should just speak up. And to her, she wanted somebody to take an interest in her opinion. And so I learned very quickly, you need to think about other people's approach too, and you need to flex and meet them some of the way there. And so it was amazing, because as soon as we sort of had this realization that we're just approaching things a different way, we need to recognize what other people's approach is. And so I don't think I'm changing who I am. but I am looking at who am I working with, and maybe what are the things that we need to consider when we're working together, when we're solving problems. How do they like communication? How do they like working together? And ultimately, if we're both sort of flexing to get there, then we're going to get across the finish line together.
You mentioned that you spent a large portion of your time like thinking about how to maintain and build relationships. What does that mean? Are you like I guess I'm thinking about this in a very simple way, like you're like brainstorming gifts to like send people, but like what are ways that what are you thinking about? Are you thinking about, things to say, like things to do together? Like what are ways that you build and maintain your relationships?
So I think to build relationships takes time. And you also have to have you have to have an interest, right? You can't just say, I want to build an interest. I'm going to do these things because I get something out of it. I think you really do need to really care about having a relationship with other people. And there are varying degrees, right? There are some relationships I have at work and we work together a lot. We have a lot of conflict. We also talk a lot about personal families, kids, and things like that. I have other relationships at work that I think are absolutely phenomenal. And I have never shared a personal detail in my entire life. And so there are varying degrees, right, of what relationships at work look like. But if you don't have a real interest in building a relationship, then it is a little bit harder, right, to sort of let that organically come on its own. But time, I think it is probably one of the most important things, right? You need to be consistent. You need to be clear. And then I think the other two pieces are communication and consistency. And so communication, right, is really important that you have to have it, and you have to be very clear about what you're looking for, or if there's conflict, or say, hey, I don't understand this. You keep saying this, or I don't know if I agree with that. Can we talk about that more? But most of the time, right, conflict usually arises out of a miscommunication. And so when I think about building them, show up, be consistent, and be open to their ideas too. Every argument and every request can't be the hill you die on. You need to give to them sometimes as much as you're asking for. When I started in this job, I was told, hey, good luck building relationships with the various resorts. Some of them there are some prickly personalities out there.
Right.
And in one particular case, I went and I knew it was going to be a little bit of a challenge. There was some animosity before, there was some conflict, right, between corporate and the resorts and being told what to do and things like that. So we showed up and we actually went out to dinner and we had this conversation. And I said, look, I know that it has been a challenge with the Denver office, with the corporate office. I understand that. Part of my job is to try to fix this. And so this is my soapbox to you. I said, there are going to be times when you have to do things because we said so. And you're not probably going to like it, but you have my commitment that I will explain it and I will give you the information and the reasoning behind it. And there was a lot of mistrust before of like, you're told what to do, but nobody explains why, nobody gives you the reason. So I told this individual, you have my commitment that I will at least explain it to you. You may not like it, but you will understand it. And on the flip side, it's going to go the other way too. And when there are those times that you need to say, back off, we're doing this because this is what is important for us in our business, you have my commitment that I will listen and I will do my best to understand it. But it is going to go both ways. And I think we had this sort of realization that we're going to work together, and we almost immediately sort of had this open dialogue, this open communication, and neither one of us really is worried about calling the other person to say, hey, we got to have this conversation. It's going to be a little bit of a challenge. And when I think about maintaining the relationships that I have out there, the most important thing that I can think of is you don't always need to ask for something. Find opportunities to reach out to people where you're not telling them what to do. You're not asking for a favor. I don't need you to do something or fill out a form. What are the opportunities you can just show people, I'm thinking about you, our relationship is important. So for me, what that actually looks like is at the beginning of the season, I try to reach out to the destinations to say, hey, congratulations on your opening. Really excited for a great season. Or, hey, I saw that you closed last week for the season. Congratulations on a great season. There's nothing more to that than just, hey, I'm thinking about you. I don't need you to do anything. A couple weeks ago, we had a big snowstorm here in Colorado, and a few of the destinations, they got an enormous amount of snow overnight, and they had to close for the next day for safety reasons. And I reached out to a few of the folks that I know work in the resort, and I said, hey, I hope you're doing okay. I hope everybody is safe. Let me know if there's anything that we can do. There's absolutely nothing I can do to help them, from Denver. I'm not going to get out a shovel. I can't help turn on the lifts. I can't help dig out, chair lifts. But I think this act of reaching out to say, I'm thinking about you. I understand the next couple of days are going to be challenging. If there is something we can do, let us know. Without sounding really creepy, I do keep a list of people's birthdays. If somebody drops in a conversation, hey, yeah, Wednesday was my birthday, I'll try to write it down. And on the person's birthday next year, I'll send them a note that just say, happy birthday. I like to send articles and ideas to people. If I hear an interesting podcast or I read an interesting article, I'll send it out to people who I think would take interest in it. And then I also really think about opportunities to meet with people where you have nothing in it. What can I do for you? How can I help you? Is there something that you need? Ask questions when there's nothing in it for you. And again, I think it goes back to this idea of you can't ask for something every single time. And when you start to build this rapport with people and they, don't run for the hills every time you're coming because they think, oh my God, she's going to come again and she needs me to fill out some form or she needs me to do something. Those are kind of the things that I think about. And I look at my list of people, right, that I interact with across the company, outside of the company, and I try to think every so often, is there somebody on this list that I really haven't talked to in a while? And if I haven't, is there something that makes sense, right? Like, I don't like reaching out to people just to check some box to say, hey, I did it. I sent them an email. But if there's a reason to, and it's just, I think awareness is a big part of it of, okay, you're right. I haven't talked to that particular resort or I haven't talked to them in a while. Even last week, a gal that works with me, she reached out to a resort that I haven't talked to in a while. They're in the Southern Hemisphere, so their seasons are very different and everything is kind of the opposite. And she was emailing with them and I responded to the email. I took everybody else off and I sent it just to the one person. And I said, hey, I haven't talked to you. I feel like I haven't talked to you in forever. How is your summer going? How has the weather been? Are you guys excited for the season? And it really was just this opportunity to continue to build connection and meaning. And when you have to go back to somebody to ask for something or you need help or you have a problem to solve, it's really awkward if you don't have any of this other stuff there to help sort of deal with the conflict.
So, all right, there's a lot you just threw at us. I want to recap for folks so we can break this down. So at first you said relationships, there's 3 things that it takes to build relationship: time, communication, and consistency. I love that. And then you started to give us specific things, actions that you'll take. So you mentioned just sending people a note if you're thinking about them. You remember people's birthdays, which sounds like
I have to write it down. I have to write it down. I can't remember it. I do write them down. I put them in a calendar.
That's impressive, nevertheless. Sending articles, podcasts, relevant information, and then just finding ways to help folks however you might be able to, or at least offering to help people. Those all feel like really simple actions individually, but you add up the list of people that I'm sure you're staying in touch with, keeping tabs on, like that's a lot. And that's what I've always struggled with personally, and I think a lot of people do, is like, we have this, this network, this digital Rolodex of folks we try to stay in touch with, but how many people can you meaningfully stay in touch with? Like, what is it? Dunbar's number is like 150 people that you can supposedly have relationships with. Like, have you found a max that you can actually still operate and do a good job?
No. And you're right. It's a lot of people. So, I think there are some things that you can do, right, that help. So one of my first jobs out of college, is very sort of traditional company in the South. And every Friday you had to write 10 handwritten notes. Every Friday they had a stack of stationery and you could write it to anybody you wanted. It didn't have to be, colleagues. It didn't have to be work related. I was 21 at the time, so I had no work contacts to send 10 letters to every Friday. So I would write letters to my grandmother or friends or other people that I knew. But it did kind of create this habit of writing letters as often as I could and finding opportunities to do that. So there are some things I think from like a habit standpoint that we can try to add to our daily, weekly, regimen of, how you stay in contact with people. And you're right, there is a limit of how many relationships you can have and at what level, right? And as I said, some of my relationships are maybe I don't talk to them every day all the time. It could go months without talking to them. And then others I talk to all the time, and we're constantly sort of, going back and forth. And that changes with the season, it changes with the week, it changes with the time of year, and it could change with, how things are going from a budget standpoint or a planning standpoint, right? I spend a lot more time with finance in different times of the year, and then I won't see them again for, several months. I mentioned the Southern Hemisphere, right? Everything is kind of backwards. And so my interactions with them are very seasonal depending on, what's happening, what we're working on. And I think the idea is that when you take the efforts over time, it should add up collectively. And you can't maintain 150 relationships at the same level every single day, day in and day out. And it's exhausting, right? And I don't think people want to hear from me. I don't think the same people want to hear from me that often. But I think it is sort of this idea of if you're not somebody who naturally builds relationships, or it is harder to maintain them, or you feel overwhelmed, are there some things that you can do to make that easier or more organized for you, where over time, if you add them up, it does amount to something more? And, at one point in time, I felt like I was very unorganized, and I was kind of over here and then over here, and my communication with people felt really inconsistent. So I actually just sat down one day and I made a list of every destination that I work with. And I went down that list and I said, I talk to these people every day, all the time. And just bringing awareness to maybe where I had fallen short of paying attention to what the opportunities were with some other folks too. And I think, for me, we have this collection of destinations that are owned by Alterra, and then we have all these partners, and it can be really easy to get sort of sucked over into the land of partners. And I do have to be reminded, don't forget these coworkers that you have internally too, and the relationship is different and the organization is different. And so you really do have to just bring awareness to maybe where you are or you aren't touching the right, you aren't having the right touch points. But again, I think to your point, there's only so many that you can have for into what level. And it's okay that some are deeper than others. But I think awareness and trying to find out what works for you. But again, like writing letters, and I don't know everybody's birthday. I only know a handful of people, and some people I don't even reach out to on their birthday. I think they would think it's creepy. But it is sort of this opportunity of finding what works for you and the people, the people that you work with.
I think if I started sending people letters, no one would be able to read them because my handwriting is terrible. So I've actually at one point considered doing that, and we would do that for clients a long time ago. And then no one said anything, but I realized I don't even think people can read what I'm writing. So I stopped doing that. But
in the digital world that we live in, the power of a letter in the mail, I think it's powerful. It's amazing. When you get something in the mail with your name on it that somebody took the time to write for you. Even the other day, we just launched for the 24-25 season, and it's always a lot of work to get there. And there are a lot of people who spend late nights and get thrown curveballs at the last minute. And this one individual I work with, I think he got on a ride he wasn't quite ready to take. And it was rough to get there. And so I brought in, I know that he has a thing for chocolate. So my last trip to the grocery store, I bought some extra chocolate bars, and I brought them into work and I put them on his desk, and I took a piece of stationery and I wrote him a note and just said, hey, I want to thank you for everything that you do. I really appreciate it. But again, I think there's this the step, right, of making that little bit of extra effort to write a handwritten note and go find people to recognize their work and say, hey, I realize this was a lot and you really stuck it out. I really appreciate it. So I think that kind of, again, goes back to the next time we're in the foxhole, it won't maybe feel so bad because you know that you have people in there with you and we're all there.
See, and that example is interesting. The thought of going to the store and buying chocolate and writing a note and putting it on someone's desk, that sounds like it would take a ton of work. like a bunch of time. But when you think about, well, you were already at the store, so you just swung by the candy aisle.
Yep.
You were walking through the office. Like it probably took you no more than like an extra 7 minutes collectively.
Yep.
But like the mental load, the mental time, or the mental exertion of energy to do that seems much higher than the actual physical amount of time to do something like that. How do you suggest people like break through that mental barrier of like, sometimes the things to do really they take 30 seconds, but it's getting your mind in that mode of doing the 30-second tasks rather than, you know, the one big task you have for the day.
So I think for me, I think about it a lot. And so there is this element of, if something comes to my mind, I just write it down in my notebook and like, you know, my daily to-do list, and I'll get to it if I get to it. And, you know, the other day, just out of nowhere, I thought, oh my gosh, you know, he really likes chocolate. It's been kind of rough. I should get him some chocolate next time I go to the grocery store. So it had, you know, it's not like I did it in that exact moment that day, but I wrote it down and I knew next time I go to the grocery store, you're right, this isn't that hard. I think if you're somebody who doesn't think about this stuff or feels really overwhelmed with it, I think you can just find, what is the one thing I can do this week then? And it doesn't have to be something hard. It doesn't have to be anything big. Even the other day, I went out to get a cup of coffee. I left the office. I went for a walk, enjoy some vitamin D. And I knew this gal would really appreciate a cup of coffee in the afternoon. And so I bought one for her and I brought it back and I put it on her desk. And so I think thinking about those things of where's the low hanging fruit. And I think if you can build a habit of doing these types of things, then you'll recognize them more often. And again, it doesn't have to be buying stuff. It doesn't have to be doing huge things every day, every week. But I think it's the small things that really matter. And, you know, I joke with my husband that when we first started dating, he would send me flowers like on a Tuesday for no reason whatsoever. And it was just a note that said, I'm thinking of you. And those types of things have such a bigger impact to me than buying me flowers on my birthday or giving me something on Christmas Day, right? But those little touch points and those opportunities to tell people you're thinking about them and I have a relationship with you, I want to maintain it. And I want to be somebody that you come to as well, right? I talked a lot about how I may need something for you or I may have a conflict, but you want to be that person for somebody else too. And when you get those things, it feels really good, right? When somebody does something for you just because they were thinking of you, being that, like, it really, really feels good to all of us. And so I think starting small, think about the little things. What is something you can do in your staff meeting once a week? We started in our larger staff meetings a couple weeks ago. We started this, 5 people picked 5 other people to say, who do you want to recognize? And they said, oh, okay, you know what? I really want to recognize Cole. He's done such a great job. I really can see him working hard and he really helped me out with this project. The next staff meeting, now it's your turn. And Cole gets up and says, hey, I'm now going to recognize Jamie. Jamie really did something for me. And so we've started this sort of behavior of just sort of paying it forward and calling people out. That requires no effort. That requires no time. You're not buying anything. You're not even writing anything down, right? So I think finding those small things, making them a habit, and then just building it over time.
Yeah. If you had to total up like the cumulative power of relationships, and I don't know if you could even do so, but I mean, what is the value? Seems like the wrong word because it sounds like we're trying to extract something from people. But what is the value of relationships?
For me, it's always been the thing that made or break how much fun I had in my job and how much I enjoyed doing what I was doing. And it is when you feel like you're with people and you're solving problems and you're just having a really fun time and you're enjoying what you're doing. And that does mean that sometimes there are difficult times. And so I think the value of relationships is what makes your job something that you enjoy going to, and you enjoy being around you enjoy being around people that are in the office. And, you know, in the outdoor industry, right, we already have this built-in sort of natural passion and connection to the things that we're doing. We all love, you know, in my case, I work with a bunch of people who think skiing is the greatest thing on the planet, right? And they love the outdoors and they love hiking. We already have this shared commonality of the passion for the outdoors. So it makes our jobs really fun. It would be a lot harder if you were, say, selling insurance, right? So building relationships with people who it's a place that they go and it's a thing that they do every day. But I think in the outdoor industry, we have this amazing space where we're already connected with people with a shared passion, and it makes it a lot more interesting, and it makes your job more fun. In one of my jobs, before I worked at Alterra, I worked at Nike, and I'm not sure I ever found my place there. And I'm not sure I ever really had this group of people that I really felt like were my people, or that I had a really good relationship or a really authentic relationship with people. And it made it really challenging. And so when you do have those hard days and you feel like you're kind of going at it alone, it doesn't make it a place you want to go to. And again, we spend an enormous amount of time. And if you don't enjoy the people you're around and you don't have this ability to have these relationships at whatever varying degree, right? It makes it really hard. And then, I would challenge most of us are in a position where you can just tell people what to do. So you have to rely on other people to get your job done. It's a very rare, even if you're the CEO, right? To get your job done, you still need buy-in and support from other stakeholders. And if you don't spend time building rapport and equity with other people, it's going to be a really hard time for you to get things done, especially when you have varying degrees of targets, right? So there are times when the goals at a destination are different than the goals that are, say, at the Denver office. Or when I worked in college athletics, I worked at a university, and our goals were very different than what the corporate office wanted us to do as well. And so it is going to be very difficult to get to a place together when you already have sort of some conflict in goals and what's important to me. You have to have relationships. Just carrying around a big stick, telling people what to do is really ineffective. And in the long run, you have to have other people. And if you don't spend your time building relationships with them, my guess is you're going to get stuck pretty quickly and you're not going to be able to move forward.
As that saying goes, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with others.
Absolutely. That is, if I could have come up with that, I would have said it too. It was great. It's very true, right? Again, this idea of think about your relationships as influence versus power. And so being able to tell somebody what to do, it's clear and you can do it that way. But I don't think it's very effective, and it doesn't feel good either, right? When somebody comes in and tells you, well, just do it because I said so, you're just eventually, right, when there's an opportunity for you to say that back to that person, that's probably what you're going to do. And in the end, you both kind of lose. And so I do think about relations through influence versus power. What are the priorities? And understanding that sometimes I'm going to give and sometimes you're going to give, but we're going to get there ultimately together. But you need those relationships to get far.
I like that. Influence versus power. I did want to circle back and ask, is there a difference between building versus maintaining relationships? Are there different tactics or things that you will do or not do if you're trying to turn an acquaintance into a friendship, for lack of a better word?
Mm-hmm. I don't know. I think that the difference between building relationship is that there's no trust there, right? When you first start out, you have to earn trust. Now there is some level of I'm just going to give you the benefit of the doubt that you are trustworthy, and then I'm going to trust you and you're going to trust me. But I think that there is a difference between building trust and already having trust. And so building relationships, I think, requires a different type of communication and a different type of attention because you are trying to build something. When you already have the equity there, you can use that, right, in your communication, and you can use that as part of your maintenance. But when you're trying to build a relationship, that trust isn't there. So you need to be consistent and show up and be honest. Otherwise, it's just different, right? But I do think the principles are still the same.
I still can't imagine 50% of your time is split between this relationships, this ambiguous skill, which is the most soft skills of them all, it feels like. And then 50% of your time is spent doing good, who knows what, odd things.
Odd things.
For people who maybe don't have 50% of their time available to work on relationships, how would you recommend people move forward in their life if 90% of their time, if they only have 10% of their time available to do this type of stuff and they can't spend 50% of their time thinking about this and acting on relationships? Are there different strategies or tactics you'd recommend?
So I think that I would challenge people too, right? There are jobs and there are positions where you really are more of an individual contributor, or you're an individual employee doing sort of solo work, right? Like you're sitting down and you're building something on your own. But I would challenge you that are you really as an individual contributor, are you really working just by yourself? You probably aren't, right? You're asking questions to your coworkers, you have a manager, you have employees below you. And so I think this idea, like I have a lot of varying external relationships, right? Partners, resorts, other departments, and things like that. So mine is very diverse. But what about the people that you sit next to at your desk, the people that your other stakeholders, right? Like if you have to process payroll or you have to process invoices to people, you probably are working with other people. So I would challenge people to try to look for the things that are just not so obvious. Maybe they feel more obvious in my job, but look and see what those are. And if 50% is probably outrageous for some people, right? Like, oh my God, I don't have enough time for that. But I bet you have time for one thing once a week. And again, like I said, when I started my first job out of college and I had to write these 10 letters every week, I wrote those letters to family because I didn't have anybody. I was 21. I didn't have a bunch of coworkers. I was a week into the job. I didn't know who to write these things to. But I knew that the gal sitting next to me, and it was kind of goofy because I would write a letter, I would put it in the mail, and it would get mailed to her. It would go through the postal service, right? And it'd show up on her desk next to me. But again, like I would think about the little things. And if it's not a huge part of your job, it's still a part of your job. And it's okay that it's not as much. I don't think that you have to contribute, and you don't have to contribute, in a 50% way, but relationships are a part of everybody's job in some fashion. And if that's 10% or 1%, then do a really good job and maintain those relationships for the 1% of your time that you do have. Something is better than nothing. And again, nobody is totally on their own by themselves. We're all working with other people in some way, right? So what are those? And if that's only a couple of people and a couple of things, that's great. If it's 700 people, then think that's okay too. There's just varying degrees, I think, of what that looks like.
Personally, I'm curious if a majority of your work are these soft skills. Like, is that ever a challenge for you as you kind of wrestle with like, where do I fit in? What is my role if I'm just like, sending notes and sending chocolate and helping with the odd task that shows up?
Mm-hmm. So it's interesting because one of my favorite things to do is at work right now is we'll go somewhere and a colleague of mine will introduce me to somebody else that they're with. And they'll say, oh, this is Erin. And one of my favorite things to do is to listen when they introduce me as to what they think that I do. And so the answer is always different. And they'll say, oh, this is Erin. She kind of does everything. Or this is Erin. She works on Ikon Pass. Or this is Erin. Wait, Erin, yeah, what is it that you do? And I think sometimes I have a hard time explaining that as well. And I think because it is very nebulous, it can be challenging to explain to people. And there is this element of, how do I justify my worth? And do I feel like I'm contributing in a way that means something to other people? And, sometimes I wish I worked in something that had a clear swim lane, right? Like I sent emails. I sent 3,000 emails this week and 2,500 of them opened it. And so it's sometimes it feels easier to me to look at other roles and say, it's so easy for you to quantify what you do and to justify what you do. And because mine is very nebulous, at times it does feel like you question yourself a little bit of what is it that I do? And is it really important? And that can be really toxic. And it's really hard when you start to sort of question yourself and your worth, especially around softer skills and the things that you can't quantify. And when there are people around you who also don't understand what you do and they have a hard time, then it can be really challenging. In one of my roles, I was at Nike and my boss had left. And all of a sudden there was this sort of assumption in an informal way that I was just going to take on a lot of her responsibilities. I wasn't promoted. There was no email. There was nothing that was like, hey, Erin, can you just step in as an interim? I just sort of fell into this weird land for a while. And I was really not the specialist in the room. And I certainly didn't have the most experience out of other people in the room. And I was having a really hard time sort of questioning what my role is. What am I supposed to be doing? And I reached out to a coworker and we went to have coffee and I was kind of explaining to him I'm having a really hard time. And should I even be in the room? Should I be sitting at the table? And he told me, and this is the other value of relationships, right? People who will be honest with you. He told me to suck it up and get back to work and stop being such a whiner. And at first I thought, well, that's not very helpful. I kind of wanted a hug and, like a rah Gipper speech. And he told me very quickly, get out of your head. You're doing a great job. You're wasting your time and your effort questioning yourself like this. And you're letting other people, perhaps perspective about what you do or you don't do, cloud the value that you bring to the table. So suck it up and get back to work. And he was very clear. It was kind of a brutal answer, but it was a good realization that you know your value, and sometimes it is hard to quantify. And that can be a challenge and a hurdle to get over, right? Ourselves and the imposter syndrome of like, what am I doing? Am I really supposed to be here? But, look for the people who remind you to suck it up, get back to work, and kick ass, right? And show up and just do the work, and don't let that cloud your contribution. Because I'm sure you're doing a great job. So don't let that sort of get in the way.
I just recorded an episode before this one. It's out. If folks are listening to this now, it's out on the podcast channel. It's called with Mike Roque from Mountain Gazette. And we're talking about like building an audience and respecting your audience and the value of an audience from like a media publication perspective. But he said this quote, and it was this quote from his dad, and I think it really applies to what we're talking about today. He said, "Crumbs make a cake." I wrote that down, and I'm looking at a Post-it note I put on my desktop because I love that expression, that idea that, and I feel like what you're describing is like relationships take time. Sometimes it feels like you're not building something, there's no end deliverable, but if you put enough time in and you gather enough crumbs, like eventually you're going to build a cake, and you'll be able to look back and say, wow, like I helped do this, but even better, like I did it with these people that we slowly, built a relationship and a rapport with over time.
I love your crumb analogy. There's a gal that I work with, and we had a discussion about something, and the answer was no, we can't do it. And a couple weeks later comes across my desk, and it was blatantly against what we had agreed was a no. And I was really caught off guard, to be honest. It felt kind of like a slap in the face a little bit. And I reached out to her and I sent her an email. I really don't condone sending emails when you're mad or frustrated, right? But this was an email, and I sent her and I said, hey, we talked about this. I'm really confused. And to be honest, I'm really caught off guard at the moment. Give me a shout when you have a chance. I'd like to understand what's going on. But I was really honest that I'm kind of upset about this right now. We talked about this, and this is really kind of in direct conflict to what we clearly agreed to. And she emailed me back and she said, I'm finishing up an email. I'm going to call you in 20 minutes. And when we got on the phone, it was an argument. Nobody was screaming at each other. Nobody was yelling. Nobody was emotional about the issue. And she said, you're right. I totally see how this looks like is a conflict to what we had agreed to. I think this was our interpretation of it. And we very quickly figured out it was pretty honest miscommunication. And it was a 10-minute conversation that was over. But when she called me, I didn't dread the phone call, and I didn't dread her reaching out to me. It really was, please call me so we can figure this out. But you're right. It took 6 years of building crumbs into a cake that then we could stand upon to say, how can we resolve something? And at the end of the day, this thing is really, really small. And the grand scheme of life and the grand scheme of our jobs and all the things that we're trying to do, this one little thing is actually pretty small. So don't let it become something that it's not. It was very easy for us to say, great. And it was over in, a 10-minute phone call. And I think that's one thing that, out of all the things that happened in COVID that we learned and we adapted and we adjusted life, probably the thing that I miss the most is the in-person time that we have with people that we work with. And now I work from home occasionally, and I go to the office, and I sort of split my time between the two. But for me, the ability to just walk into somebody's office or to see somebody on camera to solve things is so much easier than it is in email or in text or when people's cameras are not off. And so, you asked earlier, what are some things you could do to build relationships? Put your camera on. Every time you're having a meeting, put your camera on. And it's okay in a lot of instances, right? Like on a snow day, my kids were running back and forth behind my camera, and they had been stuck in the house for 2 days. And so it was hard to it's hard to tame feral children running around, but but being able to see somebody and talk to somebody is just so much better than an email and having your camera off. And so I'd really challenge people too of, if you can't send a letter and you can't reach out to people just to say, hey, how's your day going? Or that feels weird and it doesn't feel authentic to you, I'd start with making sure that your camera is on for every meeting that you possibly can, because it is a connection with somebody else that's not just an email and not just a person behind a blank screen.
Yeah, I love it. Erin, I appreciate the time. Again, I think this is such a lot of the things we talk about on this show are, do this for X results, or here's how to, I don't know. It's very tactical. Sometimes it's in the weeds, and I appreciate conversations like this where we get to talk about more of like the behind the scenes of like, how do those things get created? How do the campaigns and, the media planning and the strategy that goes forth into the work, but we're talking about like a layer behind all of that. And it's fascinating to hear kind of your perspective on some of this and how, much of your job is just about relationship building. So I appreciate it. If you had to summarize this conversation into kind of some key takeaways for our audience that they could consider as they roll forward into their day, what would you want to pass along?
I would tell people we all have relationships at work. And they look different to everybody, and they look different based on your job and what you're doing and what everybody else is doing, but we all have them. Building authentic relationships takes time and consistency and communication. And once you do that and you have this level of rapport and this equity in your relationships, you're going to accomplish a lot more, and you are going to get further. And those conflicts and those arguments that we sometimes have at work, they're not going to feel as big. They're easier to get through, and you're going to get through them faster. And to be honest, it's a lot more fun. The most fun and the best projects and teams that I've ever worked on were the ones that I had really great relationships with. And I look back and I think, man, that was lightning in a bottle. Those were the people that I had the greatest time with. And it did mean that sometimes it was hard. Sometimes we really had to work through things and sort of trudge through the muck. But build those relationships and be willing to invest your time and your energy and be willing to give to other people too. Sometimes you're going to have to accommodate somebody else, and not everything is the hill that you can die on. Be willing to let some things go, because when you give to somebody else, and they'll give with you in return. And think about relationships not as a quid pro quo. Relationships and authentic relationships are because you have an invested interest in their success and the overall output of what's happening. And as soon as you turn into sort of this tit for tat type relationship, it becomes very transactional, and that will only get you so far. And so I would challenge people, think about your relationships, be willing to invest the time, be willing to be honest, and you will be amazed at what you can accomplish and how much fun you have doing it when you have those types of relationships.
Amazing. Erin, if folks want to connect with you, if they want to say hi or talk further, where can they go to find you?
I'm on LinkedIn. Reach out to me. I'm not always great about returning messages on LinkedIn, but I do look at them. So reach out. I'm happy to have a coffee or a conversation with anybody who wants to.
Amazing. Well, Erin, thank you again. I really appreciate the time and the conversation. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Great. Thank you. I enjoyed being here.
All right. Take care.
Thanks.